A former elite Navy veteran, after leaving the service, decisively became one of the most feared assassins in the underworld. However, during a failed assassination mission, he not only turned against the crime boss he once served, but also found himself hunted by a relentless female detective, someone who had always been his sworn enemy. Because of this conflict, he even had to kill his own protege. Just how deep is this vendetta that it pushes a man to risk everything and attempt to wipe out an entire criminal organization? The story begins 3 days earlier. That day, Gabriel was mourning his late wife when he suddenly received an urgent call from the crime boss, Nord. With a tone of guilt, Nord said he didn't mean to disturb Gabriel on his wife's Memorial Day, but the situation had become too critical. He needed Gabriel to meet immediately. It turned out that the gang had an important transaction coming up. Worried that their mortal enemy, Lewis, would sabotage the deal, Nord wanted Gabriel to eliminate him first to avoid unexpected complications that could ruin everything. But despite having blood on his hands, Gabriel was an assassin with principles. He would never take a life on his wife's Memorial Day. So after Nord left, Gabriel immediately contacted his student, Carlos, asking him to handle Lewis instead. Carlos, though young, was highly experienced. He walked into an apartment building and placed a newspaper-wrapped bag of weapons right outside the door before knocking. 2 bodyguards instantly stopped him for inspection. Although Carlos said he came to discuss business, it was clear Lewis was wary of him. Only after confirming Carlos wasn't carrying anything dangerous did Lewis signal for him to sit. However, the conversation quickly soured. Lewis acted arrogantly, claiming Nord was doomed to fail and intentionally provoking tension between Carlos and the gang. It was clear the negotiation was over. Carlos calmly stood up and walked toward the door, then swiftly pulled out the hidden gun. In the blink of an eye, he took down both bodyguards. He dodged the bullets Lewis fired at him with ease, then raised his gun and ended Lewis on the spot. At the same time, 2 police officers, Leo and Sophie, were on duty outside. They were casually chatting, completely unaware of the chaos happening inside. Suddenly, Carlos appeared at the doorway. Leo immediately grew alert and lifted his binoculars. He saw Carlos retrieving a bag from his car and heading back into Lewis's apartment. Inside the bag was a timed explosive. Carlos placed it on the table and quickly left the scene. However, his suspicious behavior caught Sophie's attention. She was about to step out of the car to investigate when Carlos noticed them and snapped a photo of them with his phone. A second later, a massive explosion erupted. Fortunately, because they were at a safe distance, Leo and Sophie were not seriously injured. But as they reviewed what had just happened, 2 high-ranking agents suddenly approached. They criticized Leo and Sophie for being ineffective. The Lewis case had been assigned to them for a long time, yet there had been no progress, and now the target had been killed right under their noses. The higher-ups had lost patience and decided to hand the case over to the senior agents and the DEA. Meanwhile, Carlos and Gabriel returned to Nord's mansion to report the mission. When Nord learned that Carlos had been spotted by the 2 officers, he, being extremely cautious, immediately ordered Gabriel to eliminate the cops and clean up the loose ends. Because this trouble was caused by his own student, Gabriel reluctantly agreed. After leaving the mansion, Gabriel told Carlos to quickly track down the officer's address and notify him so they could take care of it together. At the same time, Sophie still had no idea that she was in danger. She was frustrated and irritated, unable to shake off the anger in her chest. Leo advised her to learn how to control herself, warning that one day her temper could lead to a serious mistake. But Sophie said she simply couldn't change. Her past trauma made it impossible for her to suppress the violence inside her. A while later, Carlos managed to track down Leo's address. The man was in his mid-50s and lived alone. Hearing this, Gabriel immediately signaled Carlos to move. Carlos dragged 2 suitcases with him and knocked on Leo's door. Seeing a stranger standing outside, Leo instantly became alert and prepared to tell him to leave. 1 second later, after confirming the target was dead, they quickly dismembered Leo's body into multiple pieces and carefully wiped every trace of blood from the floor. After cleaning the scene, they packed the remains into the 2 suitcases and drove to a deserted area. There, they dug a hole and buried both suitcases deep underground. Every trace of Leo's existence was erased. Because the mission went so smoothly, Carlos Loz grew careless and arrogant. He believed taking out the remaining cop wouldn't be difficult at all. So he told his mentor, Gabriel, to go home and rest. He would handle the last target alone. With no other choice, Gabriel reluctantly agreed, but reminded him to be more cautious. Back home, Gabriel stared at the photo of his late wife. The grief he had been suppressing suddenly overwhelmed him. He was exhausted from this bloody, merciless life, but walking away from it was never that simple. Meanwhile, Carlos received a message from a corrupt police officer. After getting Sophie's address, he had the crooked cop guide him there and used the cover of night to approach her house. However, the noise they made awakened Sophie. Already sleeping uneasily, she immediately grabbed her gun, rolled off the bed, and listened carefully to every sound around her. Moments later, the corrupt cop burst into the living room with a gun in hand. Sophie was ready, she fired instantly. The man collapsed on the floor, dead on the spot. The remaining men changed tactics after seeing their partner go down. One opened fire with a shotgun, blasting at Sophie to pin her down, while another circled around to attack from behind. Under the intense gunfire, Sophie had no choice but to retreat. She ran outside, opened the police car's trunk, and grabbed a rifle. But just as she armed herself, the assassin inside the house chased after her. To her shock, Sophie realized the man lying dead on the ground was her colleague, Joe. Before she could even process what happened, Carlos suddenly appeared behind them and fired, shooting straight through Joe's heart and ending his life instantly. Horrified and furious, Sophie had no time to fight back. She panicked, jumped into a car, and sped away from the scene. Carlos kept firing at the fleeing vehicle, but still couldn't bring her down. At this point, Carlos had not only failed the mission Nord assigned, but his arm was severely injured. He immediately called Gabriel to report the situation. Gabriel instantly sensed something was wrong. But Carlos was still his student, so Gabriel had no choice but to step in again to clean up the mess. When Nord heard that the assassination attempt on Sophie had failed, he flew into a rage. The failure was delaying his entire operation. Right in front of Gabriel, he threatened to kill Carlos for being incompetent. Unexpectedly, Gabriel's expression turned cold. He calmly assured Nord that he would personally take care of it. Because Nord trusted him, he decided to spare Carlos. As long as Sophie was eliminated, everything would be fine again. But neither of them had any idea that things were about to get far more complicated. After escaping death, Sophie went straight to D, the partner of the corrupt cop Z. Furious. She demanded to know why Joe had come to assassinate her. But D insisted he knew nothing. Then he tried to intimidate her with an arrest warrant, threatening that both of them could end up in jail while they sorted things out. Sophie didn't trust him, but without any evidence, she couldn't confront him directly. So she quickly left the city center to search for more clues. But the moment she left, D secretly called Carlos. He warned that Sophie was becoming suspicious and that he wanted out of the plan. Carlos found it laughable, someone as corrupt as D talking about justice? He then threatened D, ordering him to track down Sophie's whereabouts while he personally handled the rest. Meanwhile, Sophie anxiously headed to Leo's house. Everything looked normal at first, but bullet holes in the door caught her attention. She grabbed a UV light and scanned the wall near the entrance. What she saw made her heart sink. Bloodstains, hastily cleaned. She instantly realized Leo had been attacked. Sophie then went to the boxing gym to meet Oman, her coach and a trusted colleague. She asked him to help investigate the background of Carlos Los. They were both shocked by what they found. Carlos had once served in the military and was a highly skilled marksman. But after leaving the service, he lost his way and drifted into the criminal underworld, eventually becoming a professional assassin thanks to his exceptional skills. After reviewing the entire file, Oman warned Sophie not to confront Carlos head-on. With her current abilities, she stood absolutely no chance of defeating him. The best thing she could do was lay low for a while until the danger passed. At the same time, Gabriel was secretly investigating Sophie's background as well. What he discovered stunned him. She was fluent in 7 languages, proficient with multiple weapon types, and her combat skills were far superior to the average officer. Clearly, she was no ordinary cop. But there was something even more shocking. Her birthday was the exact same as that of Gabriel's late wife. Even the necklace Sophie wore was identical to the one his wife used to wear. This brought back a flood of memories for Gabriel. Years ago, Gabriel had been a Special Forces soldier. During a mission supporting the White Elephant Wildlife Protection Movement, he met and fell in love with the woman who would become his wife. After retiring from the military, he struggled to make a living and was eventually forced into the life of a contract killer. His wife had always opposed his work, and just as he was preparing to leave the assassin world behind, she passed away from cancer. Years of living as a hitman had worn Gabriel down. That was why he poured all his effort into training Carlos, hoping the boy could eventually replace him. But now, looking at Sophie, who reminded him so much of his late wife, Gabriel found himself emotionally conflicted. He realized he might not be able to bring himself to kill her. Meanwhile, Sophie was being hunted by Carlos with no escape route left. She grabbed her weapon and hid inside a small motel. She tried calling her colleagues at the police station for help, but to her shock, they told her to return and surrender. Furious, Sophie hung up unaware that the call had exposed her location. At that moment, Nord was having dinner with his wife. They had just ordered their meal when 2 assassins burst in and opened fire. When Gabriel received news that his boss had been ambushed, he rushed to the hospital immediately. Legal advisor William had already arrived. He informed Gabriel that Nord's wife, Mrs. Tommy, had died on the spot, and this incident would not be easy to contain. However, because the corporation's business had just become fully legalized, William hoped Gabriel could convince Nord not to destroy everything they had worked for by seeking revenge. As someone who had also lost a wife, Gabriel understood Nord's pain. Instead of agreeing to William's request, he entered the hospital room. He ordered all subordinates to leave the room, leaving only Carlos Los and the bodyguard who had failed to protect Nord. After giving the bodyguard a brutal beating, Gabriel told Carlos to investigate the mastermind while he stayed behind to watch over Nord. Early the next morning, Carlos returned with information. The two assassins were not professionals, and their weapons had been traced back to Mexico. Gabriel suspected Colombian involvement, but Nord rejected the idea and insisted that the attack was orchestrated by a Russian gang. Enraged, he declared that he would take revenge. Gabriel immediately supported him, telling Nord to rest and recover while he and Carlos handled everything. The two set off for the gang's hideout, a restaurant that appeared ordinary from the outside. Gabriel and Carlos pushed open the door, walked through the main hall, and eventually found their targets. Gabriel casually spread his arms in greeting and got straight to the point. He had something to deliver to their boss, Rudy. The subordinate didn't suspect a thing and led them upstairs. Gabriel told Carlos to stay behind while he climbed to the second floor. Just as he approached the office, a massive man eating sausage blocked his path, warning that no strangers were allowed inside. Seeing how stubborn the man was, Gabriel calmly said he had an appointment, then struck the man down the moment he lowered his guard. Without hesitation, Gabriel kicked open the office door and eliminated Rudy before the man even had time to react. The gunshot instantly panicked the gang members downstairs, but Carlos Los had already anticipated chaos. He quickly drew his gun and took down several of them. However, more heavily built thugs rushed in, and they were much harder to handle. Fortunately, Gabriel arrived just in time, helping Carlos regain control of the situation. They dragged all the bodies into the kitchen, soaked everything with gasoline and alcohol, and burned the entire place to erase every trace. On the way back, Gabriel called Nord to report that the mission was complete. But instead of being satisfied, Nord angrily urged him to deal with Sophie immediately. Carlos, sitting in the driver's seat, concluded that Nord had gone insane. Gabriel simply shook his head. He too sensed something wrong. Later, Gabriel drove alone to the funeral home to retrieve his wife's ashes. No one knew what he intended to do, not even Carlos, who couldn't reach him. That night, Carlos led a group of armed men to surround the motel where Sophie was hiding. Inside, Sophie immediately sensed danger. She gripped her gun tightly, ready for a fight. As the assassins prepared to break down the door, she slipped into the next room. She was skilled with firearms, but the sheer firepower from her attackers gradually pushed her into a losing position. Just when things became critical, a black car suddenly screeched to a halt in front of her. The person who arrived was none other than Gabriel. Seeing Gabriel helping their target, Carlos exploded with rage and called him, demanding to know what he thought he was doing. But Gabriel calmly replied, "I've done what needed to be done," and hung up. A moment later, Nord called, furious, demanding to know why Gabriel had betrayed him. Gabriel didn't bother explaining. He simply said he was resigning. It turned out that after dealing with Rudy, Gabriel suddenly discovered a harsh truth. The person who killed Nord's wife was not a Russian gang at all. The entire story had been orchestrated by Nord himself. His intention was to use Gabriel's hands to eliminate a business rival. Tragically, Nord's wife became an innocent victim in his scheme. Gabriel could no longer tolerate such deception, so he decided to stop Nord's next plan. He took the ashes of his late wife and headed to the motel to rescue Sophie. Years ago, he had failed to save his wife's life. Now, he refused to stand by and watch a female officer, who reminded him so much of his lost wife, be harmed. In Gabriel's heart, Sophie had become an extension of the woman he once loved. A while later, Sophie followed Gabriel back to his house. As soon as she stepped inside, she noticed a framed photo of a woman. She was about to ask about it, but Gabriel raised his hand, signaling her to stop. Talking wasn't the priority right now. After many years working under Nord, Gabriel understood clearly that the man would never forgive betrayal. A battle was inevitable. However, as a top assassin, Gabriel had already prepared his defenses. His house had been reinforced and fireproofed, strong enough to withstand external attacks. Inside, he stored a large amount of weapons and ammunition, turning the place into a small fortress. Meanwhile, Nord gave Carlos his final order: eliminate Gabriel and Sophie at all costs. Carlos hesitated. He didn't want to face his own mentor, but Nord insisted this was his best chance to become the successor. Not long after, through the surveillance monitors, Gabriel spotted a large group of assassins approaching his front door. Remembering their old camaraderie, the leader, a heavy-set man, didn't want to destroy their bond. He signaled for Gabriel to hand over Sophie, promising that things could still be resolved peacefully. But the only response he received was the cold barrel of Gabriel's gun. The first wave of assassins was swiftly eliminated. However, passive defense was never Gabriel's style. After a rare quiet night, he suggested teaming up with Sophie to strike directly at Nord's estate. Sophie naturally wanted to end this feud once and for all. But just as they were preparing their weapons, four cars suddenly pulled up outside. The doorbell rang. It was Carlos, the very man Gabriel had trained with his whole heart. Speaking calmly, Carlos said he had asked Nord for 5 minutes to talk. Gabriel let him inside. The two didn't say much, they simply shared a quiet drink. When the 5 minutes ended, both drew their guns at the same time, like duelists in an old western, ready for a deadly showdown. But Carlos had underestimated Gabriel's skill. He was shot first, blood spreading across his shirt. Even so, Carlos refused to give up, using the last of his strength to fire repeatedly. Gabriel dodged every shot. Finally, Carlos collapsed onto the sofa, dying under Gabriel's sorrowful gaze. After dealing with Carlos, Gabriel quickly moved to the second floor. He expertly assembled his sniper rifle and began picking off the remaining assassins outside. Sophie fitted a scope onto her own rifle, ready for battle. By now, the assassins had lost their patience. The leader shouted for Gabriel and Sophie to surrender. As the firefight intensified, one assassin took advantage of a brief pause in gunfire, rushed to the door, and planted an explosive. Meanwhile, under the relentless assault, Sophie moved to hold the entrance and create an escape route for the both of them. But just as she passed through the doorway, the bomb detonated. The bulletproof glass shattered instantly, and assassins flooded in like a tidal wave. The two worked together flawlessly, quickly wiping out the second wave of attackers. But the danger was far from over. Before they could even catch their breath, another group of assassins stormed in, this time armed with heavy machine guns. The dark barrels pointed directly at the second-floor windows, clearly intent on killing Gabriel and Sophie at all costs. Watching the surveillance monitor, Gabriel tilted his head back and took a long swig of strong liquor. Sophie did the same. The burning liquid ignited the fire of determination in both their eyes. The final battle was about to begin. Gabriel grabbed his weapon and rushed upstairs. He found a grenade and told Sophie to hide in the bathtub, the most reinforced spot in the house, capable of withstanding maximum gunfire. At that moment, the assassins outside opened fire, bullets raining down on the house like a storm. Gabriel sprinted toward the back door, unleashing gunfire in a fierce shootout. Eventually, he ran out of bullets, but by then most of the assassins surrounding him had already been taken down. Meanwhile, the firefight inside the house began to die down as well. After shooting the last remaining attacker, Sophie finally stepped outside. Despite everything she had seen as a police officer, she was still shaken by the sight of countless bodies scattered across the ground. Elsewhere, after hearing that his entire assassination squad had been wiped out, Nord prepared another team of professional mercenaries to finish off Gabriel and Sophie once and for all. But just then, a stranger suddenly barged in. Before Nord could react, he collapsed under the muzzle of the intruder's gun. It turned out the man was from the Russian gang, seeking revenge for Rudy. In the end, Gabriel entrusted the urn containing his late wife's ashes to Sophie, asking her to keep it safe. It was both a farewell to his past and a gesture of protection for the woman before him. Gabriel then laid down his weapons and honored his wife's last wish. He returned to Africa, dedicating his life once more to protecting the white elephants. That was where he would spend the rest of his days, finding the peace he had long lost. And that brings the film to its conclusion. For those interested, you can watch the original movie White Elephant. The value of a film lies in its reputation, but the value of a review lies in the emotions it conveys. Our story ends here. Thank you for watching. What do you think about this movie? Feel free to leave a comment below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe.